Erich von Manstein was one of the most respected Wehrmacht commanders, a man who rose through the German army's ranks and planned some of the most stunning German victories during World War II. But why is Erich von Manstein one of the most admired German generals? Was he a true strategic genius, or just another result of German propaganda during the Second World War? Manstein was born in Berlin in 1887, being the biological son of Prussian aristocrat and artillery general Eduard von Lewinsky. But he was adopted by his aunt and uncle, General Georg von Manstein, as the couple was unable to have children. So Erich von Manstein had numerous relatives who were military officers, including another one of his uncles, the future Field Marshal and President of Germany, Paul von Hindenburg. Manstein's education obviously led him towards a military career, so he entered the Cadet Corps in 1906. In 1907, he was promoted to the rank of lieutenant, and in October 1913, he began the officer training program at the famous Prussian War Academy. However, Manstein only completed the first year of the program. When the First World War began in August 1914, all students of the academy were ordered to report for active service. He never completed the remainder of his general staff officer training. During the First World War, Manstein served on both the German Western and Eastern fronts. He took part in the invasion of Belgium and the capture of Namur, a massive citadel surrounded by forts at the time, and in the battles of the Masurian Lakes on the Eastern Front. Wounded during a Russian counterattack, Manstein completed his recovery and was later reassigned as a staff officer, where he learned firsthand how to plan and conduct offensive operations. Following the war's end, Manstein continued his military career, serving in various capacities within the newly formed Reichswehr. Notably talented and intelligent, Manstein was among the 4,000 officers permitted to remain in the army under the restrictions of the Versailles Treaty. Quickly rising through the ranks, he played a significant role in shaping German military strategy, advocating for innovations such as the Sturmgeschütz self-propelled assault guns, which would later prove to be among the most successful and cost-effective German weapons. Promoted to Major General in 1936, Manstein became Deputy Chief of Staff under General Ludwig Beck. However, he missed out on Beck's position as Chief of the Army General Staff due to political maneuvering, as Franz Halder was appointed to the position instead. On April 20, 1939, Manstein delivered a speech at the celebration of Hitler's 50th birthday, in which he praised Hitler as a leader sent by God to save Germany. He warned the hostile world that if it kept erecting ramparts around Germany to block the way of the German people towards their future, then he would be quite happy to see the world plunged into another world war. It would later become apparent that the world would be plunged into war indeed. In August 1939, Manstein was appointed Chief of Staff to Gerd von Rundstedt's Army Group South for the impending German invasion of Poland. Along with Colonel Günther Blumentritt, he developed a plan which focused on concentrating armored units to achieve a decisive breakthrough and encircle Polish forces west of the Vistula River. Still, Manstein had his reservations regarding the Polish campaign. He was especially worried by a possible Allied attack from the west, which would then draw Germany into a two-front war. On September 1, 1939, the German invasion began. It saw success, with Army Group South's 8th, 10th, and 14th Armies advancing and encircling Polish forces. German forces displayed flexibility and agility, which led to successful engagements such as the Battle of the Bzura, where 200,000 Polish soldiers were either killed, wounded, or captured. As such, the conquest of Poland concluded swiftly, with the last Polish units surrendering on October 6th. Following the success in Poland, Hitler now turned his attention westwards. In preparation for the invasion of France, Case Yellow, initially drafted by Walter von Brauchitsch and other generals, resembled the Schlieffen Plan from World War I. However, both Hitler and Manstein were dissatisfied with its focus on a northern attack, lacking surprise and potentially leading to trench warfare. After informally consulting with General Heinz Guderian, Manstein proposed a bold alternative: a surprise thrust through the Ardennes forest to reach the English Channel, cutting off Allied forces in Belgium and northern France. Despite initial rejection by the German High Command, Hitler eventually approved a modified version of Manstein's plan. Erich von Manstein also commanded an army corps during the operations in France, which helped with achieving breakthroughs and crossing the River Seine. The invasion of France proved to be an outstanding military success, earning Manstein promotion to full general and the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. In March 1941, Manstein was appointed commander of the 56th Panzer Corps, tasked with advancing through the Baltic states as part of Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. After Barbarossa began, his corps made a surprising dash towards the Dvina River, advancing 315 kilometers in just 100 hours. They then participated in efforts to encircle Soviet formations around Luga. However, Manstein faced difficult challenges as his corps became the target of Soviet counteroffensives, particularly at Soltsi in July 1941. Despite setbacks, his forces regrouped and eventually succeeded in encircling 5 Soviet divisions near Staraya Russa, resulting in a major Soviet defeat. But Manstein was displeased. He would have taken the chance and dashed towards Leningrad instead of conducting conservative frontline actions in the Novgorod region. Nevertheless, on the 12th of September, Manstein was ordered to take command of the 11th Army of Army Group South in Ukraine, changing his role in the conflict. Tasked with invading the Crimean Peninsula, capturing Sevastopol, and securing the flank of Army Group South during its advance into the Soviet Union, Manstein's forces faced heavy Soviet resistance. Still, by mid-November, they had captured the entire Crimean Peninsula except for Sevastopol. Initial attempts to capture the city in 1941 failed, and Manstein prepared for a large offensive on Sevastopol, bringing support of every kind, including numerous Stuka dive bombers and the Schwerer Gustav railway gun. During late December, a surprising Soviet offensive was launched, threatening the Axis position in the Kerch Peninsula. Manstein then redirected some of his forces to counter the Soviet threat, preventing an Axis collapse in the eastern part of Crimea. From January to May 1942, Soviet troops launched several offensives to push the Germans out of Crimea, but never managed to push them back significantly. Manstein gathered resources and started his offensive. For the Battle of the Kerch Peninsula, launched on the 8th of May 1942, Hitler finally assigned Manstein major air support. The 11th Army was outnumbered on the ground, so Manstein had them feint an attack in the north, while the bulk of the force attacked to the south. The Soviet troops soon fled, and Manstein recorded in his memoirs the capture of 170,000 prisoners, 1,100 guns, and 258 tanks. Kerch was captured on the 16th of May, while the Wehrmacht lost only 8,000 men. The Wehrmacht then directed most of its available resources towards the conquest of Sevastopol, as its capture was a prerequisite for the upcoming offensive in the Caucasus. Time was running out for the Germans, which knew that they only had a few months available for mobile operations before the Rasputitsa season came during the autumn. In the Sevastopol area, a furious German barrage began on the morning of the 2nd of June 1942. Along the Schwerer Gustav, super-heavy Karl Gerät mortars and hundreds of Stuka dive bombers were brought and used in the assault. The 11th Army gained ground during mid-June, focusing their attention on the northern approaches to the city. Casualties were high on both sides as the month dragged on. But then, Manstein pulled off another surprise attack across Severnaya Bay, using amphibious landings. The operation was a success, and Soviet resistance crumbled. On the 1st of July, German forces entered the city, while the Soviets conducted a disorganized evacuation. On that same day, Hitler promoted Manstein to field marshal. The entire city was in German hands by the 4th of July. After the fall of Sevastopol, Hitler sent Manstein to Leningrad, which had been under siege since September 1941. With elements of the 11th Army, Manstein arrived on the Leningrad front on the 27th of August, 1942. Lacking sufficient forces to storm the city directly, Manstein planned Operation Nordlicht, which aimed to sever Leningrad's supply line at Lake Ladoga, effectively surrounding the city and forcing its surrender. Leningrad's fall would have freed up hundreds of thousands of Wehrmacht soldiers, which were desperately needed in other parts of the front. However, upon his arrival, the Red Army launched the Sinyavino offensive, aiming to open a land-based corridor to Leningrad. Hitler, contacting Manstein directly, ordered immediate action to counter the threat. Manstein launched a counterattack on the 21st of September, eventually cutting off the two Soviet armies in the salient after heavy fighting throughout October. While the Soviet offensive was repelled, the resulting attrition made it impossible for the Wehrmacht to make a decisive assault on Leningrad. In the south, Fall Blau was in full swing. After Manstein and his forces captured Sevastopol and secured the flanks of Army Group South, the Wehrmacht launched Case Blue, a massive offensive aimed at the oil fields in the Caucasus. As the Germans were severely lacking oil, this was the paramount objective in 1942. After a quick breakthrough, the Germans advanced rapidly through the Kalmuk steppe. Elements of the 6th Army, commanded by Friedrich Paulus, entered the city of Stalingrad on the 12th of September, marking the beginning of a brutal struggle on the bank of the Volga. In the south, the German army dashed towards the Caucasus, but stopped on its southern slopes as autumn rolled on. In the meantime, Manstein also lost his son, Gero, in October. He later described this as the worst thing that happened to me personally during the war. In Stalingrad itself, the Germans took horrendous casualties due to the urban fighting, which was inadequate to the fast and mobile warfare the German army was used to. After months of counting the advance in meters, the Wehrmacht was very close to capturing the entire city. But something unexpected happened. The Soviets launched Operation Uranus, a counteroffensive which encircled the entire 6th Army in Stalingrad, with little to no chances of escape. Again, Hitler called Manstein and appointed him as commander of Army Group Dawn, formed from the remnants of Axis troops in the area. Manstein was tasked with breaching the encirclement and devised a relief operation named Winter Storm. Launched on December 12th, the offensive initially progressed well. Manstein's 3 panzer divisions, along with supporting units, advanced to within 48 kilometers of Stalingrad by December 20th, facing Soviet tank assaults and adverse weather conditions. On December 18th, Manstein requested Hitler's permission for the 6th Army to attempt a breakout, but Hitler refused, and both Manstein and Paulus were hesitant to openly defy him. Conditions deteriorated in the city, with German soldiers suffering from lice, extreme cold, and inadequate supplies. Despite Reichsminister Hermann Göring's assurances of air supply, logistical difficulties proved insurmountable. On January 24th, Manstein urged Hitler to allow Paulus to surrender, but Hitler declined. Ultimately, Paulus and his army surrendered after losing about 200,000 soldiers in Stalingrad. Only 6,000 men would return from Soviet camps after the war. Still, Manstein believed he had done his utmost for the 6th Army, despite initially saying that the 6th Army should not attempt a breakout. However, the Soviets did not stop their attack and attempted to push the Germans as far as possible. The Red Army planned a series of follow-up offensives in January and February 1943, intended to decisively defeat the German forces in southern Russia. Attacks were launched towards Kharkov and Kursk, threatening to cut off all German forces east of Donetsk. Manstein took command of Army Group South and attempted to organize a defensive line with the forces at his disposal. The Soviets recaptured Kursk and pushed further towards Kharkov. While Hitler called for the city to be held at all costs, Manstein managed to persuade him to send reinforcements in the area. Simultaneously, the field marshal planned an unexpected operation, the Kharkov counteroffensive. Launched on the 20th of February, it later became known as the backhand blow. Nikolai Vatutin and the Soviet forces under his command, believing that Manstein would retreat, were taken completely by surprise. By the 2nd of March, the Wehrmacht had captured 615 tanks and had eliminated more than 20,000 Soviet soldiers. Hitler returned to the Ukrainian front on March 10th, emphasizing the political significance of reclaiming Kharkov. Meeting with Manstein, they reviewed the situation, and the field marshal strategically positioned available forces as to prevent further Soviet incursions while conducting his own offensive. The city was recaptured on March 14th, after intense street fighting, earning Manstein the Oak Leaves for his Knight's Cross. Also, Belgorod fell to Hauser's 2nd SS Panzer Corps on March 18th. Manstein's counteroffensive not only stabilized the front, but also reclaimed significant territory, destroying 3 Soviet armies and forcing another 3 to retreat. Soviet casualties totaled 46,000 dead and 14,000 prisoners, with some 600 tanks and 1,200 artillery pieces captured or destroyed. With the spring thaw beginning by March 23rd, operations in the area halted temporarily, and plans were made to eliminate the Soviet salient at Kursk. As summer of 1943 rolled on, Hitler realized that the tide was beginning to turn. Along with the high command, they realized something had to be done in order to regain the initiative on the Eastern Front, although resources were becoming more and more scarce. With more of the new weapons on the way, such as the Tiger I and the Panther, the Wehrmacht would attempt a daring operation. Operation Citadel, launched on July 5, 1943, marked the last major German offensive on the Eastern Front and became one of the largest battles in history, involving over 4 million men. Even if the Soviets outnumbered the German forces by 3-1, the offensive went forward. Walter Model led the northern pincer, while Manstein commanded the southern. Both armies faced great obstacles, with tanks being destroyed in minefields and encountering fierce resistance along the multiple defensive lines built by the Soviets. Despite initial progress by Manstein's forces, Hitler called off the offensive on July 13th due to the Allied landing in Sicily. Manstein protested, believing the Soviets had exhausted their reserves, but Hitler insisted on a withdrawal. While Soviet casualties were significant, modern historians doubt the feasibility of a successful continuation of the German offensive at Kursk. A Soviet counteroffensive, launched on August 3rd, put heavy pressure on Army Group South. Despite Manstein's calls for reinforcements, Hitler initially sent only a few divisions. Construction of defensive positions along the Dnieper began, but Hitler refused to authorize a retreat from Kharkov. By August 20th, Manstein requested either permission for withdrawal or reinforcements due to stretched lines and threats to his northern flank. When the Red Army concentrated its reserves to retake Kharkov, Manstein exploited the opportunity to close the gap between his armies and establish a defensive line. Finally, Hitler permitted withdrawal across the Dnieper on September 15th. During the withdrawal, Manstein ordered scorched earth tactics, leading to further charges against him at the Nuremberg trial. Soviet losses during July and August were substantial, but German losses were also significant and were much harder to replenish. In September meetings, Manstein failed to convince Hitler to decentralize military decision-making. Anticipating a Soviet attack on Kiev, Manstein correctly predicted the general direction of the offensive, but fell victim to Soviet deception regarding the timing and exact location. The 1st Ukrainian Front, under Vatutin, surprised the 4th Panzer Army and gained a foothold on the west bank of the Dnieper. Subsequently, Kiev fell to the Soviets on the 6th of November. Despite brief German successes in mid-November, Vatutin's offensive resumed in late December. By January 1944, Manstein deemed the Dnieper line untenable and sought permission to retreat, which Hitler refused, insisting on his sole authority in strategic matters. Still, Manstein's strategic skill earned him a place on the cover of Time magazine in January 1944. In March, after successful Soviet offensives, 220,000 of Manstein's men were trapped at Kamenets-Podolsky due to delayed permission from Hitler to retreat. Although most of the encircled men managed to escape, Hitler relieved Manstein of his command on the 30th of March. In his defense, the field marshal replied, "My Führer, please believe me when I say I will use all means at my disposal to defend the soil in which my son lies buried." On the day of the failed 20th of July plot, an assassination attempt on Hitler's life, Manstein was at a seaside resort in the Baltic. Although he had met at various times with 3 of the main conspirators, Klaus von Stauffenberg, Henning von Treschow, and Rudolf von Gersdorf, Manstein was not involved in the conspiracy. He later said, "Prussian field marshals do not mutiny." Realizing Hitler wouldn't assign him a new post, Manstein purchased an estate in East Pomerania in October 1944, only to be forced to abandon it when Soviet forces advanced into Germany. His home in Liegnitz was evacuated in January 1945, and he sought refuge in Berlin, where he demanded an audience with Hitler but was denied entry. As the war in Europe ended in May 1945, Manstein and his family moved westward, but he encountered complications after an eye surgery and was hospitalized in Heiligenhafen. Manstein was arrested by the British on August 26 and transferred to a prisoner of war camp near Lüneburg. In October 1945, Manstein was transferred to Nuremberg, where he was held at the Palace of Justice. During the post-war trials, Manstein denied knowledge of the Einsatzgruppen's activities and claimed not to have carried out Hitler's Commissar order. However, documents contradicted his claims, revealing he was aware of the atrocities. Despite testimonies implicating him, Manstein was acquitted in September 1946, when the General Staff and the Army's High Command were declared not to be criminal organizations. In 1948, under Soviet pressure, Manstein and 3 others were again charged with taking part in war crimes on the Eastern Front. Despite arguing that his actions were justified, Manstein was found guilty on 9 charges and was ultimately sentenced to 12 years in prison. His release in 1953 was influenced by his declining health and political pressure, including efforts by Winston Churchill and Konrad Adenauer. In 1955, Manstein was among a group of former senior officers called upon to help plan the re-establishment of the German army. His speech to the Bundestag in June 1953 advocated for a professional army with longer conscription periods, a proposal which was later implemented. Also, Manstein's memoir, Lost Victories, published in 1955, gained widespread acclaim for its critical assessment of Hitler's leadership. Despite his controversy, Manstein became a revered figure in German military circles, being hailed as one of the greatest generals in history. He lived out his later years in various locations, settling near Munich in 1958. He died of a stroke on June 9, 1973, at the age of 85, and was buried with full military honors, his funeral being attended by soldiers of all ranks. So, what do you think? Was Erich von Manstein one of the greatest German generals? Tell us your opinion in the comments below. And, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and subscribe to our channel. There are many more videos coming at Study of War.